Thank you to our sponsors for today's video, Eaton, Amber, InfyPower, and StarCharge. Eaton is a one-stop shop for implementing reliable and innovative EV charging infrastructure at your site. Across all applications, Eaton's EV charging infrastructure hardware and software gives you the scalability, flexibility, and intelligence you need to charge today and scale up tomorrow. Learn more at eaton.com/EVCI. Also, our sponsor, Amber, providing modern protection plans for your Tesla's battery and more, without the hassle of long-term contracts or upfront payments. Check out the link in the description to explore their plan options and use code SPEC5 for a 5% discount on all orders. And InfyPower is the largest EV charger module provider with over 3 million power modules running reliably worldwide. Their latest G2 collection features ultra-high power density and efficiency for EV charging and energy storage integration. InfyPower, innovation for your power. And StarCharge, the largest EV charging manufacturer in the world, and is also a provider of residential and commercial battery storage with microgrid solutions. Hello and welcome to a video about all of the bad things about electric cars. Now, this is not meant to be some sort of like, oh, Kyle hates EVs now. No, in fact, I love electric cars. But I think if we're honest, every powertrain choice in a vehicle comes with pros and cons. And well, certainly I'm going to do a video about some of the pros, the best things about driving electric, which in many cases outweigh the cons that I'm going to share with you here. But I've compiled about 10 categories of areas that I really think are annoying or just flat out bad when it comes to driving an electric vehicle. And I think a lot of times as EV drivers, we're sort of programmed to combat the hate, combat the negativity. It's like, everyone's like, oh, they can't go anywhere in the winter time. And we go, well, actually, if you precondition, you do this, it's actually not that bad. However, I think it's important to realize that a lot of the criticisms that electric cars get are rooted, at least in many cases, they're rooted in some kind of truth. And I think what's important is to get everyone on the same page to understand equally what really are the problems here so we can all talk on the same playing field, the same level of understanding, rather than just like some people thinking, oh, they suck for like completely different reasons. So in this video, I'm going to run through everything I believe that makes electric cars worse than combustion cars. So join me. I realize a lot of you are not going to like that I'm making this video. Some people have this innate urge to promote electric cars or to, try and convince you to drive electric. And from my perspective, personally, I just want people to enjoy what they drive. And the whole point of Out of Spec as an organization across our channels, but especially here on the reviews channels, is to point out the good and the bad so that you can make a more qualified purchasing decision when it comes to buying a car. And of course, a lot of our viewers, you guys watching this video, have stuck around along the way, and you can see all the cars we're testing and learn about them and really build this knowledge base along with us as we learn about cars. And, I've been able to drive pretty much every single electric car on the market, all the way from a cheap old Nissan Leaf, even some classic EVs. I own like a first generation RAV4 electric with a nickel metal hydride battery and some other things. And then, of course, being able to experience the latest and greatest of technology, all the way from, the new Tesla Model 3 that I consider to be one of the best vehicles on sale, if not the best vehicle on sale, which I've said many times, all the way up to Rolls-Royce Spectre and beyond. And I think through a lot of my thousands of miles of testing, hundreds of thousands of miles of testing, I've found some key areas where electric cars don't perform as well as I want them to. And I also asked you guys on Twitter, and you also gave me a lot of your ideas, hundreds of comments about where you think electric cars are not living up to the hype. And what's really cool is we have a very EV-focused viewership here on this channel. And I think it's cool that we can all be a little bit honest with ourselves to say, okay, yeah, driving electric, there's a learning curve, there's downsides. And again, I will have another video going through a lot of the pros here. The one last point I got a lot of comments on, because I, of course, mentioned I was going to make this video, was some people believe that Tesla is the best and everyone else sucks. And they're like, Kyle, you have to quantify your video and say driving a non-Tesla electric car. However, almost every single one of these problems also counts towards Tesla vehicles. I own currently 3 Tesla electric cars. I guess technically 4, but I own 3 of them, and I've owned them in the past. We've probably had 15 or 20 of them between my friends and family, maybe more than that. And so we have a lot of Tesla experience. And I'll certainly mention when there's issues such as software that Tesla does really well that others get wrong. And I'll mention that. But there's certainly a lot of like this rush to defend Tesla out there from the viewer and investor base that just drives me crazy. So anyway, getting that out up front. Okay, not getting into the categories yet, but the overwhelming majority of responses that I received, the most comments came around road tripping an electric car. And I think there's a lot of misconception, first of all, out there that you can't road trip an electric car. Well, certainly you can. And actually, my buddies Drew and Timon and myself, we just broke the electric cannonball record from New York to Los Angeles in a Porsche Taycan, an electric car. And we beat Google Maps. So we can say it's faster to drive an electric car across the country than Google Maps suggests. Now, certainly you can drive a combustion car much faster across the country, but it's not just about the time that it adds on the road trip, although there can be some. So I think I just want to mention right up front that a lot of the negativity around electric cars and the negative points that I'll bring up, there are also ways around them, ways to optimize, and I'll point out when that's necessary. But road tripping was the overarching theme as to the negative experience. Now, my view, actually, that doesn't represent the Kyle Connor view. My view is I love road tripping an electric car. That's when I actually think they kind of work best, because I can charge for 15, 20, 25 minutes. I can then drive another few hours, and then I'm back to another forced rest, but there are problems that come along with that. It also is very vehicle dependent. If I'm road tripping a Rivian or Cybertruck or F-150 Lightning, it's going to take significantly longer than if I was road tripping a Taycan or a Lucid or a Model S. And so that is almost an interesting downside of an electric car compared with combustion, where it's very vehicle dependent to determine how quickly you can go on a road trip. Whereas a combustion car, it doesn't matter if you're driving a diesel F350 King Ranch dually or a Honda Civic, you're pretty much going to go on the same time on your trip. And that is certainly an interesting take. So let's get into the first major category downside of driving an electric car, and that is charging. Now, I want to focus more on the vehicle side of charging, because there's a whole video I need to make about the infrastructure itself, the reliability, the software, the hardware, the locations. And yes, that is tied to owning an electric car, but it would be a 3-hour-long video if I got into charging. But there are some issues around charging electric cars from like the vehicle side that I want to talk about here in this video. And the first thing that is weird and is not brought up enough and is annoying is charging losses. Now, what happens with charging losses is you have to pay for the electricity that you are taking from the grid and putting into your battery. The problem is there's transmission losses, and you also have to run pumps and cooling and other things. So imagine filling up your gas tank and just a little bit of gas always spilling out. Well, with an electric car, that's really what actually does happen. And you'll notice on DC fast charging, maybe anywhere between 8 to 12% of losses at times, which means you're paying for energy that doesn't go towards propelling the vehicle or warming the cabin or any useful item to you. And as electric vehicle charging gets more expensive, which has been the trend recently, you want as much energy as possible going to propelling the vehicle. And it is fair that the user takes on the cost of these transmission losses, I believe. You should really pay for whatever going in, whatever's coming out of that cable and into your vehicle, you should pay for. And there's losses from the wiring. There's I squared R losses, heat loss, essentially. So at the higher the current level, the more losses you'll have. And that means that the lower voltage electric vehicles have a higher percentage of loss than the higher voltage electric vehicles in general. And you're just warming things up. You're having to run pumps to cool them down, and you have energy that you're paying for that's not going to propelling the vehicle. So that is one thing that is certainly annoying about driving an electric car. The other thing is the charging curve. When you are charging on DC, so direct current, a high power charging station, think Tesla Supercharger or Electrify America or EVgo or one of these public big high power charging stations. The charging time and speed is directly related to your percentage point at state of charge. Now, we look into this in every car, and every car has different charging behavior, but in general, anywhere between 0 and 20 to 30% state of charge, you pull your maximum speed for most cars. Some cars can hold it longer. Some cars can't even hold it that long, the maximum performance. And then the higher you go into your pack, let's say you want to charge to 80% or 90% state of charge, your charging speed decreases. So now for the amount of time that you're sitting at the charger, your miles added per minute of sitting there in terms of usable range is decreasing the longer you sit there. And it just gets worse and worse and worse until you get up to 100%. Certain electric vehicles have a different charging curve that is sort of flattened across the whole way. But that means that they've kind of shaved the peak off and just held the lowest common denominator through the entire charging session in general. And so there's no way around it. Batteries charge faster when they're at lower state of charge. And that is annoying, because wouldn't it be great to just sit at 300 plus kilowatts to 100%? And again, every car has a different behavior. Every battery pack has a different behavior. And that is what we aim to show in our charging curves on our website and in our charging logs on our testing channel. The other thing that's kind of interesting is it is extremely temperature dependent when you get to a charging station. So not only does your battery pack charge faster when it's down low, you need to ensure that you arrive to the charging station at a preconditioned temperature, at a warm battery temperature. If you arrive too hot, you could overheat your battery when you're pulling full speed. If you arrive too cold, you can charge really slow. Or in the wintertime, you may not charge at all, and you have to sit there connected to a charger, pulling a tiny bit of energy to get the battery pack warmed up enough to start accepting power. These are the realities of driving an electric car. And certain vehicles, especially Tesla and Rivian and Lucid and Ford and others, when you navigate to a station, will warm up the battery on the way. But you have to remember to use the native in-car navigation in pretty much every EV that I can think of to tell it you're going to a high power charging station for it to warm up. Certain EVs have manual preconditioning buttons, but you still have to remember to hit that button. Imagine in a gas car, if you had to tell the car, I'm going to fill up, in 30 minutes, like you're planning on doing it. And it's such a pain. And again, if you're charging at home, these are not issues that you deal with, but I would argue almost every electric car owner will charge out in the public once in a while. Some other notes on charging that we'll do a whole video on, of course, are infrastructure reliability. Also, the locations of chargers is difficult because you're forced into the amenities at that charging location. So while on a map, it may look like there's high power charging everywhere in your area, but you really don't want to walk too far away from your car, especially if there's an issue during the charging session, which happens far too frequently. And so you want to stay in that localized area to the charger, and therefore you're sort of locked into where that charger is placed. The other thing to mention is on road trips and other things, hotel charging is really interesting because you're never guaranteed a space at a hotel charger. Even this week, I took a car on a road trip, and the first night, no issues getting charging plugged in. It was a slow charger. I only gained about 40% charge overnight, but it's better than nothing. And then the second evening, I plugged in. I actually went out to go drive around or get dinner, do something, and then came back, and someone had taken the spot, and then I had to basically leave my car sitting at 6 or 7% state of charge overnight. Kind of a annoyance. Another annoyance with charging is home charging, actually. Not to say that home charging is annoying. It's actually wonderful to have home charging. But the installation for home charging is wildly variable depending on the electric service to your home, the local electrician rates. And one thing I've noticed is the cost to install home charging. I just did a video on this because I put in home charging at my house, is getting more and more expensive as electricians realize, oh, these people are spending $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 on an electric car or more. I can charge them $1,200 to put in a charger that maybe just a few years ago would have cost a couple $100 in terms of labor and equipment. So that's certainly happening. And a lot of my friends, especially in our younger generation, may not be buying a home yet. They may be leasing a cheap electric car. And when they go from apartment to apartment, or a apartment to a condo, or to an Airbnb, or whatever the situation might be, it's really difficult to find living situations with charging stations. It's becoming more common, but not fast enough, and certainly you're locked in there. So I could go on for hours about issues with charging and my potential solutions, which I'm happy to, definitely want to do a video with, but these are all real considerations when it comes to charging an electric vehicle. The losses of energy, the charging performance changes based off of battery temperature and state of charge. And you're always incentivized to run your car down to very low states of charge, which can make people uneasy, to maximize the amount of energy that you can add in while you're plugged into the charger. Because again, they charge fast when they're dead and warm, and it's just a little bit annoying. The other thing, the next major topic is your range of an electric car. And especially when it comes to highway range. Now, we do most of our testing at out of spec at 70 miles per hour. I realize, and we see people saying, well, I drive 55 or 60. I'm like, oh my God, just to stop holding up everyone. And then we see other people more like me that are like, I'm driving 85, 90. What's my range going to be? Well, the point of our testing at 70 miles an hour is to find like a nice benchmarking speed that we can just compare every vehicle with. And when you're shopping, you can know, okay, well, the EQS and i7 might have similar range ratings, but in the real world, there's like an 80-mile difference on the highway. And so it's more for benchmarking reasons than real world use case to say, okay, I'm going to go this far at that speed, because your range is entirely dependent on driving conditions, which I mean, road surface, dry or wet, can impact range. Wind, a major factor. Elevation, a major factor in your range. And so many other things. Temperature, we'll get into winter range in a moment. That's a whole category, but it's just the range ratings. When you go into a dealership to buy a car and they say, this car, in the case of Lucid, has 512 miles of range. Wonderful. In order to achieve 512 miles of range, you have to drive 70 miles per hour or under. You have to drive below 0% in our case, in our test, because we went like 25 miles past zero or 10 miles past zero before it hit, that number, and then it couldn't maintain the power below that. And so it's like in the real world, you're never going to achieve the range that it says on the box. There are some very few exceptions. Some German cars, like first generation Porsche Taycan comes to mind, maybe some of the early Mercedes stuff. But I'm actually finding that, at least in our recent testing, that the range rating on paper is getting closer to the 70 mile per hour highway range. Now, that's not to say it's every case, but there should be a rating, I believe, of a city range and a highway range for an electric car, because it is wildly different. And of course, the EPA ratings in our market are a combined rating, and there's a few different tests that you can run the vehicles through. But it got more difficult for 2025, and I think it's they're going on the right track, actually. What I'm feeling is it's pretty good. But when you drive on the highway, you're going to have less range in any car. You're pushing more air out of the way, the motors are spinning faster, things like that. Some other notes on range is you're pretty much never going to full charge your car and drive it to zero. That is like such a unusual use case in an electric car. Now, we do it all the time for testing, but if I'm just thinking logically for a second, I live in the Denver, Colorado area. If I go north, south, east, or west in any direction from where I live, there is not a DC fast charger that is perfectly placed where I could go from 100 to 0 in every car. Therefore, you're always going to have to stop shorter than your total range because you can't go past. And then you're sort of limited by your infrastructure. So if you're looking at two different cars and one of them's 210 miles of highway range and one's 290 miles of highway range, sounds like a big difference. But by the time you reach that first charging station in both cars, the one with more range may not have enough to get to the next charging station. And therefore, it's of no benefit to you at the charging station. Some other notes: rural range and off-road range are pretty difficult with electric cars, especially rural, because there's not much infrastructure off of major highways. If you go to, visit some family or friends out in the middle of nowhere, better plan ahead. It's the harsh reality of living in the middle of the country. California is pretty good. East Coast is pretty good. You usually have enough range to make it there and back. But again, that means that you're sitting at that DC charger to charge up really high before you go into the area without infrastructure. And infrastructure can solve a lot of problems, but it's still early days for EV charging infrastructure. It's hard to rely on it unless it's the Tesla network. Tesla really does an amazing job with their supercharging network. So that is why, one of the main reasons why Teslas are so popular. It's just so much easier to drive and road trip those vehicles. And one last note on highway range and range predictions are: many vehicles will predict the range based off of previous driving history. So let's say 99% of your use case in your electric car is driving around the city, driving to work and back at low to moderate pace. Your electric car, when you full charge it, might say, hey, you can go 340 miles. But as soon as you jump on the highway, that's going to dip dramatically. And it's going to appear like you're losing range faster than you are driving. And in fact, it's just learning how you're driving and predicting the future usage off of your current consumption. That's just hard for a lot of people to wrap their heads around. They go, whoa, I just drove 10 miles, but used 40 miles of range. And ideally, that will flatten out and become closer to your consumption. And it's not going to be that big disparity through your entire drive cycle. But it freaks people out. There's no way around that. There are certain great technologies out there. Tesla has great, actually Lucid and Rivian, all vehicles I've been in recently, have great calculations that if you put in your destination, Porsche is good at this as well, it will tell you at what % you'll get there with. And that is a really comforting factor to have in a vehicle. So many electric cars do not tell you what you will arrive to your destination with, and you're ending up guessing. Or you're not paying attention and you're going to run out on the way. And you really need a car. Every electric car needs to have a built-in route planner with state of charge on arrival right in your face so you know what's happening. It's very true. The next category beyond the highway range of the vehicle is, actually, just one last topic on the range I just want to point out. We've tested electric cars' highway range at 70 miles an hour, anywhere between like 50 miles to 500 miles. So again, a lot of the range is dependent on what vehicle you purchase. And I would argue charging performance is more important than range for my style of driving. And like I mentioned, you can go on the highway over 500 miles in moderate conditions in a Lucid. We've done it. We've did the video, and it's totally possible. You can't do it at 85 miles an hour, but you can do it at 70 miles an hour. So I actually think the range itself is not an issue, but it's the highway range loss in comparison to city driving that confuses people. The next weird thing about electric cars is something called BMS Sway. We have a shirt on our website called Don't Trust the BMS. The BMS is the battery management system, and it essentially is a series of sensors and ECUs and modules that are balancing the battery pack modules, that are reading voltage levels, reading capacity, or I guess I should say calculating capacity left in the battery pack, and then displaying a number to you as to what is the state of charge of your car. Okay, I look at the car I'm driving, I'm at 4% state of charge. Now, in general, you're in the 4% region state of charge. But that car can never 100% guarantee it knows how much energy is in the battery pack, especially if you're driving and charging and driving and charging. So let's say you're an Uber driver that just is driving all day, or you're on a long road trip and you're discharging and charging the vehicle. And especially the higher power charging you have and the higher discharging power. So a track day scenario can really confuse some of these battery management systems to the point where we have now run out a vehicle when it has displayed 6% state of charge remaining. Now, it's a very unusual case. In most any scenario, I would say this is a very small problem, but it is still a problem that there's no way. Like, you could look inside a gas tank and go, okay, I got like 14 gallons in there, and you have a little float, and there's always a little bit beyond zero. With electric cars, it's always guessing based off of Coulomb counting and some other things while it's in motion to say, here's how much you have. And especially if you don't show the battery pack 0 or 100% state of charge, you'll notice this sway happening. And the first indication that your BMS isn't totally locked in is, let's say you set your car to stop charging at 50% state of charge. We'll get into why you would want to do that later on. Well, you would stop it at 50% state of charge, and when you wake up in the morning, you say, whoa, how am I at 53%? How's that possible? Energy can't come out of nowhere. And it's really your car learning, figuring out, always guessing, always recalculating how much energy is in there. So it's very important to look at, again, based off of vehicle model. We've seen some cars that have bang on perfect BMS. Porsche Taycan comes to mind. And we've seen some cars that don't have very good BMS. And I would actually say Tesla is pretty bad at this. My Tesla BMS, in all of my Teslas, it gets confused often, and I have to let it sit at about 5% state of charge for a few hours, charge it up to 100% for a few hours, maybe do that once, twice, 3 times over a period of a few weeks, and then it starts to figure it out. Certain electric cars with certain battery technologies actually require you to 100% full charge your vehicle. And this is typically lithium iron phosphate battery packs. So now you're expecting the owner of an electric car to recognize what type of battery is in there and then follow the recommendations of the manufacturer to best calibrate for that battery. And Mercedes has to do this, Tesla has to do this, Ford has to do this, where they recommend that their owners actually full charge their car at least once per week in the case of Tesla, so that it can restart its calculation. Because if you don't do that, you'll actually notice a massive range loss. Or the other way might happen, and the car may shut off before it hits 0. And then you're like, what the heck? Although I really have not seen that reported. Everyone seems to do a pretty good job of just going the conservative route and showing less range rather than going, oh boy, we're just going to run out with energy in there. And a lot of this has to do because lithium iron phosphate just doesn't have a big voltage difference between full and dead, or especially between a small state of charge difference. It's almost impossible to calculate without a 100% charge because the voltage curves at the top and bottom trail up and trail off. And you kind of need to get the car into those regions for it to figure out, oh, okay, here's where I am. And so BMS tuning, BMS Sway is something that many electric car owners don't think about because they're not typically going outside of a very shallow use case of the vehicle, but it is clearly something that is unusual and totally unlike driving a combustion car that I think needs to get better and be more consistent and be more dialed in. The next topic, winter. Winter was a major response from a lot of you guys as to the performance of electric cars in cold weather. And in cold weather, the range drops. Let's talk about why the range of an electric car drops. You've got many different factors working against you. The first that a lot of people don't think about is actually the air density gets more dense. So you're pushing more air because cold air is a little bit closer together. So it's harder to push through the air than on a really hot day. You also, especially at nighttime, you don't get the solar loading of the cabin for heat. So you've got to run heat. And so first of all, the air is harder to push through. The next is when the battery is cold, it has less capacity. When your combustion engine is cold and your tank is full, you still have the same amount of fuel in your tank, right? But with an electric car, you can't actually access a full energy of the battery pack when warm, when it's cold. And therefore, not only are you having to use more energy to heat the cabin and heat the battery, you actually have less energy to work with in total, which you're getting triple whammied here. And it really does affect the range. I mean, I've always been, like I'm programmed, and I imagine a lot of the hardcore viewers of this channel are programmed with responses when people say, oh, the range sucks in the winter for an electric car. And you go, well, actually, if you precondition at home and you warm up that big thermal mass of the battery pack and you get the cabin toasty while you're still connected to shore power, you unplug, and then all the car has to do really is maintain that cabin and battery pack temperature, you don't actually lose that much in the winter. And that's actually true. There are ways to avoid the cold weather range loss a bit. But when you're going on a long trip, you got a lot of cold air flying under the battery, cooling things down. You have to burn more energy on the way to a charging station because you have to precondition the battery pack to charge fast. Because again, remember, batteries don't charge fast when they're cold. And so your loads on that battery pack just go so high from a heating perspective. And the cabin, one benefit is you get instant heat or near instant heat, especially with resistive heating systems. A lot of these newer heat pump systems in electric vehicles take a little bit longer to warm up. Although, actually, I have to commend Tesla here. We did a video of resistive heating versus heat pump heating, and they were almost identical. And I think heat pump was actually working even better than the resistive heater at the time. Maybe we'll redo that video with two different vehicles, but I think it was really interesting. But either way, in the winter time, you have to, you're pushing air out of the way, you have less usable capacity, and you need to burn more energy to heat everything up in order to function properly. And the ways around it are, of course, to warm up the car through your connected application while it's connected to shore power and take the energy from the grid. But that also means that your total efficiency still is going down because you're having to take excess energy, excess cost to warm everything up so that you can have a solid driving experience. The winter range dip for most people probably doesn't actually matter, because if you can charge at home, which I typically would never recommend an electric car to someone who can't charge at home or work. If you, we're talking like your 300-mile car may go down to 250 miles or 240 miles plus or minus, for mixed driving. And I think most people are still driving less than that. Although I've heard cases and we've had commenters of folks who have a 200-mile round trip commute, for example. There was a comment of someone with a Mach-E in Canada, I believe, that had a 200-mile commute that they could do in the summertime that they no longer can do in the wintertime. Not only are they starting out cold, but then their car cold soaks while they're at work, and then they have to go back. So they're getting highway cruising on a cold battery, running heaters, and they have to drive really slow in order to make it both ways. That's really rough. And honestly, there hasn't been any great solutions to this. There's some technologies like heat scavenging and heat pumps and other thermal ideas that can, try and harness as much warm energy and then put it into your total vehicle system. But without question, electric cars struggle in cold weather from a range perspective and a performance perspective. We mentioned that the battery pack does not output full energy, cannot charge very fast unless it's warm. But it also can't output energy very fast unless it's warm. Therefore, your EV that you spent a lot of money, let's say you bought a Plaid or a quad motor Rivian 1,000 horsepower EV, well, in the wintertime, you're not getting 1,000 horsepower, not unless you run the battery heating for a really long time. And so again, these are all realistic problems that happen in cold weather with electric cars. Okay, the next topic. And by the way, I'm skipping through a lot of ones, and I'm hoping you guys will add more in the comment section as well. The next interesting phenomenon is something called phantom drain. Phantom drain is when you park your electric car at 70% state of charge at night, and you come back to it in the morning, and now it's at 65% state of charge. And you're like, where did all this energy go to? How could it just evaporate? And this is very vehicle specific. There are many examples of electric cars that do not experience phantom drain. Our Audi e-tron does not experience phantom drain. Our Nissan Leaf does not experience phantom drain. There's many others that, of course, fall into that category. However, the popular electric cars do. Tesla experiences a lot of phantom drain, especially when you're using the camera safety systems called Sentry Mode. Rivian, same thing. Lucid, not so much actually in my experience. They've got that under control, and Rivian's getting much better. And I would say in general, there was a lot of complaints on all of these connected vehicles, these software-defined vehicles, if you will, because they were using energy from the high voltage battery pack to charge the 12-volt battery, which was running the app connectivity to make it quicker to unlock when you walk up to the vehicle, quicker to connect when you log into it remotely and send it a command. And this is not necessarily unique to electric cars, because combustion cars also have apps and are connected and things like that, but not at the level of these newer electric cars that the owners are so tech focused. There's so much external interaction through your mobile device to the new vehicles that the automakers do try to leave them on or connected for a long period of time. Sometimes, certainly 24 hours minimum, and sometimes days and weeks on end. And then, the battery will just slowly drain as it's running those software issues or situations. For example, I have a Tesla Model 3, some of you guys may know, parked down here. I didn't realize I parked it with Sentry mode on. I parked it at 55% state of charge. I come back to it a week later, and I got a notification on my phone that said Sentry mode had stopped at 20% state of charge. It drained a significant amount of energy in 1 week because it was running its security safety systems. And in one area, it's really cool that it's able to do that, because a combustion car just would have to turn on to charge its 12 volt, and that's not possible. So it's unlocking new functionality that's really cool. And I think that's worth the trade-off, but it's also something you have to think about as an electric car owner, that, hey, some of these safety systems or app connectivity systems are draining the battery pack more than expected. And it seems like every automaker has realized this and they're working on it. So it definitely was like even a worse problem for like everyone a year ago. And through over-the-air software updates, which is an amazing technology, it's getting better and better. The next thing that leads to phantom drain, by the way, is actually battery pack cooling, especially in the wintertime, like we mentioned. As the battery pack cools down, the usable capacity shrinks along with it. And I'm talking just a few kilowatt hours in most cases, but it still, can go down in a state of charge reading when the battery pack cools. You'll actually get a notification on most electric cars, and certainly Tesla does this, where if you park your Tesla at 3% state of charge, it'll say, we recommend charging now, because if your battery cools, there will be less energy available in the vehicle. So again, you can park your combustion car completely on E, turn it into the dealer. It can go through the auction process. It can do whatever for 6 months, and then you can start right up and it still has fuel. An electric car, when you trade it into a dealership, when they sell it to the auction, it goes through, this is just one example, they end up just completely dying. And then you've got to jumpstart the car, jumpstart the 12 volt battery in order to get it on to accept a high voltage charge. And it gets pretty crazy. And sort of on the same-ish topic, but this is irreversible drain. This is something called degradation. And battery pack degradation is maybe my biggest fear with electric cars, my biggest annoyance with electric cars, because most of the other, I would say, issues that we're going to talk about here are kind of cool and not cool, but there's workarounds to them. Like if you're expecting it and you know it, it's actually kind of fun to see how much some of these impacts are. And again, as it warms up, these things are reversible. Just because you have a little bit less range in the winter, it comes back in the summertime. There's one area of degrading, or one area of electric cars that cause the battery pack to degrade, and it won't ever come back, or at least not as far as we can tell, not in current production vehicles. There are some studies, there's some very early experimental ideas where maybe there's a way to gain back usable capacity, but pretty much not feasible at the moment. And the thing is, degradation is just a fact of EV ownership. And there's certain battery pack chemistries that might be more resilient to degradation. There's, definitely usage has a huge impact on degradation, and also just calendar aging of when was the battery pack produced and how long has it been. And we've done, and we're going to continue to do more degradation testing to figure out what really hurts an electric car's range over time. I'll tell you one thing, you don't notice this on a day-to-day basis, but you might notice it on a year-to-year basis. So if you do one big vacation, every year and you go the same route, you may notice, hey, I didn't go as far as I did, or I have to drop the speed a little bit to make this charger where last year I didn't have to. And the percentage of degradation, I think, is way less than a lot of EV owners or EV haters think it is. A lot of people will say, well, your battery won't last 5 years, or it won't last 10 years, or won't last 100,000 miles. And everyone's got their own number that they throw out there. And the first thing to mention is most automakers guarantee their battery pack legally from a warranty perspective for 8 years or 100,000 miles minimum. Some do more. I think Rivian's 150,000. Tesla was 120,000 on some of the bigger batteries. I can't remember what every single car is now, but that's sort of the minimum. And then what they say, pretty much every automaker, is you'll have 70% capacity is the bare minimum that's the maximum capacity. What am I trying to say? It's warranted for 100,000 miles or 8 years for 70% capacity. If your battery no longer has 70% of its original capacity after, 50,000 miles, you will get a battery pack replacement. Now, this is something that is fairly uncommon because most degradation actually happens early on in the vehicle's life. So when you first buy your electric car, you'll notice within the first really 3, 6, 9, 12 months, a big drop off in capacity. When I say big drop off, I mean maybe 3%, 4%, something like that at the most. And then it will just continue to sort of level out and continue, degrading. They will never gain energy, never gain capacity into the future. And this is just something that is always in the back of my head, and I absolutely hate it. And I am slightly paranoid about it in the sense that combustion engines components wear out, things need to be replaced. I totally get that. But we're talking about, like, imagine if your combustion engine just lost a horsepower a day. That would or even a half a horsepower a day. It would just be like, what's going on here? My power is evaporating. In this case, my energy is just evaporating. And I think this is a real problem. It really is. And so some anecdotal data for you. And it seems to totally vary on a car-by-car basis, on a cell-by-cell basis, on an age basis, and a usage basis. But we have seen scattered data on capacity. Tesla just recently put up a chart that shows at 200,000 miles, they're roughly at 85% capacity. That seems amazing. And by the way, that's way better than most people think how quickly an electric car's battery degrades or lasts. I see all these Facebook comments from old people. They're like, your electric car battery is not going to last this long. And I'm like, bro, it actually is doing amazing. Now, I'm annoyed because it's not 100% capacity, but it's not like I've lost half my range in the first year. And certainly, I don't think most people will experience an electric car with more than 30% degradation. That's unusual and very unheard of. So on my cars, my Model S, Tesla Model S, a lot of DC fast charging, a lot of road tripping. It's lost about 10 or 11% state of charge in 2 years and 40,000 miles. Now that feels a bit high to me. On the other hand, my Tesla Model 3, which has had even more fast charging and is older and has arguably lived a harder life, has lost about 10% capacity in 150,000 miles. And that's what is so hard to predict is based off the vehicle, based off the usage profile, based off of that exact pack that's in your car, the retention of capacity does change. And it's very hard to predict how your car is doing, how well it will do. And by the way, one problem with this degradation is when the manufacturers say 70% capacity, how are they measuring the capacity in the battery pack? Again, the BMS never really knows because there's always a little bit of sway. And every manufacturer has their own way to measure what process the vehicle can go through to determine its health. And I can almost guarantee you it's not going to be in the benefit to the consumer. It's going to be in the benefit to them not having to spend money to put a new battery in your car. Maybe a little bit of conspiracy theory from Kyle, if you will, but that's my real impression. Some other things you can do and things that really are a downside of degradation is taking care of your battery. Electric cars are already complicated and different than combustion vehicles, and it requires, if you want to minimize that degradation, like if you're leasing your car, who cares? Do whatever you want to it, give it back to the manufacturer in 2 or 3 years. There's really not much damage you can do. But if you're planning on keeping a car for a while, which I tend to do, when I'm not driving that car for a period of time, I store it at a low state of charge. And in general, most battery packs like to be stored between 25 and 50% state of charge. And honestly, it's on the lower end is less stressful. So most like NMC chemistry cells love 30% state of charge. And that's where most of my cars stay. And the problem is whenever I go and I have to go to Denver or I got to go to the airport or whatever I got to do, I need to plan ahead, which I'm the worst planner, and charge up my vehicle to 80, 90, or 100% in order to do that trip. And sometimes I'll find myself where I'm like, oh, okay, I got to go somewhere and I've left all my cars at low state of charge for storage, and then I'm having to fast charge it on the way to where I'm going. Now, I'm probably more paranoid than most about the storage state of charge. But even in the case where you really never want to leave your car at 100% for a long period of time, even the Tesla vehicles that recommend charging to 100%, the LFP packs, you don't want to leave them at 100. You want to let them hit 100 and then bring them back down. And actually, Jason Fensky just did a great video series on how to kill your battery pack. And it talks through a lot of the resting state of charge, the charging profiles, and others. And I'll leave that to him. But the degradation is just always in the back of my head, and it really does almost limit the usable usage of the vehicle. I got a comment from someone, and I just copied it here, and I don't remember who commented it, but it says, I find myself constantly calculating the minimum amount of charge I need to do anything. And I feel like I fall in that category too. It's like I'm going to charge up just enough in order to do that, and then charge it right back up to the low charge limit. And so you have your daily charging limit, typically not above 80% for most electric cars. Some are at 90, but very few recommend a full charge every day. You have your storage state of charge, which is typically between, again, 25 and 50% state of charge. And then you want to maximize the amount of slow charging that you do to preserve the battery. Now, we haven't seen so much data on fast charging really affecting the degradation performance of the battery pack. It seems to be more on time and resting state of charge. But again, certainly charging the battery pack slower is easier on it. It is better for it. It does prevent lithium plating and dendrites from forming. And it's just a safer way to charge your car. So that is the degradation of electric cars. And then there's so much more. Again, I could make an hour-long video on each one of these topics, but I'm just trying to give you a high-level overview. The next topic is the service and repair of electric cars. Now, most new electric cars sold are under warranty, which is great. And many people are leasing new electric cars because there's insane government incentives and the downside of depreciation, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And for the most part, they're very, very low cost of ownership vehicles. They don't require oil changes. They don't require fuel filter changes or a few other things, but they still require service. And that means that they need tires, and they go through tires quicker, not because they're heavier, not because they're straight up torquier, even though they are. But I think the main reason electric cars go through tires faster is, okay, alignment on some cars, sure. Weight on some cars, sure, depending on the segment of electric car. But I think a real big contributor to tire wear is actually that they're fun to drive. They're torquey. You do lay into the throttle. You get up to speed really quickly. And because you're doing that, you're just tearing through your tires. And every time you slow down and every time you accelerate, the G-forces are probably just a little bit higher in the electric car than everyone's equivalent gas car previously. And I'm not saying the extra weight isn't hurting things, because it definitely is. But then you also have automakers that are optimizing compounds for noise. So they want a quieter tire. Well, every time you make a change to anything, there's a compromise. And so tire technology is moving along quickly, but a lot of the original equipment tires that come on electric cars are optimized for noise performance, actual driving performance, so longitudinal acceleration, but also lateral handling dynamics, which means a softer compound. A lot of them, especially in the electric truck world, are using shorter tread patterns. So they're physically cutting basically down the tire so that you have a better response and performance, but then they still have this rugged look. That's why the Cybertruck tires wear down so quickly. It's because there really isn't much rubber on there to use in the first place. And so, tires is an added cost to an electric car. And I love driving on OE tires because that's what the manufacturer intended for that vehicle to drive like. But certainly there are plenty of alternate options. And Nokian Tyres, our sponsor, of course, for this video and many others. And so Nokian makes the best winter tires and they're all EV tested. It's not a plugged spot, but it's just saying I'm okay with aftermarket tires, of course. But you have to understand when you switch tires, you're changing the performance characteristics of your electric car, whether it's noise, rolling resistance, styling, list goes on and on. From a repair standpoint, let's say you get into an accident under the service and repair, electric cars first of all, just higher insurance in general. If you look at a equivalently priced combustion car and equivalently priced electric car. It's not the case every single time, but in general, it seems like insurance is a bit higher on EVs, and everyone's individual insurance pricing is on how many cars you have. Did you bundle this? What's your driving record? Of course, the list goes on, but I don't think anyone's saying EVs are cheaper to insure. At least I've never come across anyone saying that. Some people will say like the Tesla insurance built into the car is cheaper. However, you're then under more scrutiny from the company to drive smoothly. You can't drive late at night or you get penalized. And I hate the idea of just being watched like that. And certainly my driving style is not conducive sometimes to a really cheap insurance rate if someone's totally watching how I'm driving. So higher insurance costs because the repairs are quite expensive. Now that's not entirely unique to electric cars. It's just electric cars in general are more expensive, more complicated, and have, lighter weight construction with more aluminum and other things, other components, larger panels that need to be repaired, replaced, rather than just, sometimes going to a body shop, throwing it on a frame straightener and getting it out the door. That's not really happening with electric cars. And so the insurance costs are higher. It takes longer to repair. And I'm sure there's data out there. Maybe someone can prove me wrong, but in my own experience, I've had to wait a long time for repairs on electric cars with damage. And partially that's just because there's fewer service centers who are like manufacturer certified. Like it's getting better now, but certainly like some repair shops just won't touch electric cars, and some are just going through the certification process with Lucid, with Rivian, with Tesla, and others. So this is certainly something to look into. It's an evolving situation. It may not always be bad. It may not always be more expensive, but at least currently I would say on average, it's certainly a barrier to entry to get your car into a collision center and have them fix it. On the servicing side, I actually have to say that some electric car service is better than anything I've experienced. I keep talking about the big three in the electric car space, Lucid, Rivian, Tesla. They're really setting the benchmark for this new American electric vehicle experience. And I would say all three of them have demonstrated fantastic service experiences from my own ownership and usage. They have great applications. They have great repair times. Occasionally, you have to wait to get a slot to get booked in for service, especially at a lot of the newer startups. Like I think Rivian's booked out like 2 months at my local service center, for example. And that's a very case by case with an automaker. But one thing that seems to be a trend is with existing automakers that primarily have produced combustion cars and are now producing electric cars, they may only have 1 or 2 or 3 EV certified technicians at their dealership. And so you bring your car into the dealership for a fault, a warning, a whatever. Okay, it has an issue and you need to get it serviced. Well, hopefully, A, they provide you a loaner. It's never guaranteed, but hopefully you get one. And secondly, hopefully that EV tech is not on vacation that week. I can share just a recent anecdotal experience we had where my buddy's Nissan Leaf, we did a whole video on it, ended up having a battery failure with 400 miles on the vehicle, an incredibly rare thing to happen. Just like it's incredibly rare for a combustion engine to just completely blow up or die or have a rod go through the block with 400 miles on it. But you do hear about it happening sometimes. So we had an issue, and it was interesting that it happened to our car. And so I bought or leased Danny this Nissan Leaf. It's a long story, but I got it for him because he's an awesome dude. He watches our dogs. It was very inexpensive, and it made for a good video series. And the car we got him broke down with 400 miles on it. They couldn't even look at that car for, I can't remember the exact amount of time, but days or weeks, because the EV service repair technician at the Nissan store was on vacation or sick and just not there. So your in general, your amount of available technicians to work on electric cars and the cost to the dealerships to have EV certified technicians is two negative items, no question. The other thing is warranty typically covers your high voltage electrical components, battery pack motors, depends on each manufacturer for, like I mentioned, 8 years or 100,000 miles. But if you're out of warranty, some of the repairs are crazy, especially if you bring your car back to the dealership or even if you bring your Tesla to the Tesla service center. A lot of times the fixing action or the service repair action is to just replace the items. Okay, there's a small fault on a contactor in a battery pack. Well, you might be quoted $10, $12, $20, $40,000 for a new battery pack on your used electric car because at the service center level, they will not do any module repair work. They will just swap in a new battery pack and you've got to pay for it. And this is also one of the reasons that insurance costs are so high is because if you hit a rock on the highway and it damages the underside of your battery, well, guess what? New battery pack, 40 grand, and the insurance has got to pay it or total the car, sometimes for very stupid items. And so the out of warranty repair cost can be astronomical, absolutely astronomical. And the way around it really is to find more independent service and repair technicians that are comfortable and trained and willing to break open an individual module and to spot repair the fault with a cheaper, quicker, better solution. That's how you repair stuff. That's like saying, oh, I'm trying to think of an equivalent in a combustion engine. Let's just say you had an issue with your mass airflow sensor, and let's just assume it was baked inside the engine somewhere, although I know it's not. They would say, oh, you need a new engine. And that's essentially what happens very often with electric cars is there could be this little sensor, this little issue somewhere in the line of high voltage components, and you need a new battery, you need a new motor, you need a new inverter, whatever it is, and the repair costs go wild. So the proliferation of independent third-party EV repair shops, as well as the information and the diagnostic equipment, which is not cheap to go along with it, will do a huge service to EV owners that are driving their cars out of warranty. But I own a few different electric cars out of warranty, and they are scary. It is a major problem if one of them breaks because there's very few independent shops. And even currently where I am in the Denver, Colorado area, I have multiple vehicles that I would have to ship either to Florida or New Hampshire for electrified garage, to Southern California to Conduit EV, or to Portland to Wattworks to have them fix my cars. I don't know of a great EV repair facility in 1,000 miles of where I live. And I live in a pretty populated place. And that is just insane to me. And I think a real downside to owning an electric car out of warranty, because then you're beholden to your electric vehicle's dealer service experience, whether it's Tesla, whether it's Nissan, whether it's Mercedes, hopefully not Mercedes, because we know they're going to charge you out the ass for service. And that's a real problem. So a lot of these items all combined, the service experience and the cost of repairs, the degradation of the battery pack over time, all leads into, combined with just the natural car depreciation pricing of especially electric and expensive vehicles, leads to higher average depreciation on electric cars. And it happens quickly. It's not just the fact that they slowly degrade over time, and it's not just the fact that they're expensive to repair out of warranty, but it's also the fact that they are incredibly cheap to buy new. So when you buy an electric car, you get all these tax credits. In the state of Colorado in 2024, you get a $5,000 credit. If you qualify, you might get another $5,000 credit from your utility, and you get a $7,500 federal tax credit. And you can combine all those on top of manufacturer incentives and so on and so forth. And so it's just like when you drive that car off the lot, it feels great because you're like, oh, I just got 15 grand off my new car, or 10 grand off my new car. But when it comes into the time where you trade it in, you have to imagine, well, that value that you just paid, well, everyone else is paying less money too. So your used value gets dropped immensely. Not even that. The lease deals are incredible on some of these electric cars. And therefore, it's like, why would you even buy one? I mean, in general, we've never recommended leasing on any vehicle. And now it's almost imperative that you lease a new electric car if you're thinking about getting one, because you're protecting yourself from the downside depreciation costs that might be astronomical, because the future of the electric car industry and values are so uncertain and have proven to be very undesirable when used, very undesirable. And there's no way around that. And I feel it firsthand. Some of you guys may have seen this thing that's been circling online with my face on it. I don't know who stole it or whatever, but I made a Twitter post about my experience with depreciation on my Tesla Model S. And all I did was I posted one word. I posted my original sticker price of the car, which was $140,000 and a bit. And that's before tax. And I posted my trade-in value with 37,000 miles on it. I think it was 46 grand. Basically $100,000 fell out of the trunk of my Model S in under 40,000 miles. Now, it's not unusual for a luxury sedan to depreciate, okay? Have you ever heard of Maserati? Have you ever heard of a BMW 7 Series or an S-Class? We all know that happens. So it's not that big of a shock. But I think a lot of people buying electric cars have never really owned a very nice, maybe luxury car before, and now they're able to because of the incentives that are on these electric cars. And they're in for a surprise when it's time for them to trade them in. And so you just have a large percentage of people driving around, especially if they financed, with huge negative equity in their electric cars that they can't get out of. They're trapped. It's not unique to EVs. Combustion cars, same thing, especially during the COVID bubble. But it does feel like the electric cars, maybe another 10, 15, 20, 25% bigger hit on average than the combustion cars. I'm sure there's some more data on there. But without question, the way, why would you go and buy a used $55,000 Kia EV9 that surely will be worth $30,000 in a couple of years when you could lease one for $340 a month here in Colorado right now? That to me is just, I think a big reason that the depreciation is hurting so hard on these cars. And that is a downside. It's an upside that you can lease them really cheap with all the credits, but hopefully, my opinion is hopefully, but I really hope we can achieve some sort of normalcy in the car market between electric and combustion. And we can, it doesn't need to be this huge price war, but the federal tax credit money will be hopefully going away, in my opinion, and will lead to just a more stable market long term. It's rough right now. It's going to stay rough for a while. But I'm hoping that, people will buy a car based off of their preferred powertrain choice, and they're not being forced into it or incentivized into it and ending up with a terrible ownership experience. We've all heard stories because they were not prepared or ready or excited to drive electric. Okay, next topic is, for me, also very important, but for many people it doesn't matter, but it's performance driving. So we're talking, some of these electric cars are so fast, and that's awesome. They are setting lap records, 0 to 60 records, 0 to 150 mile an hour records, half mile. Some of these things are just so fast. 1,000 horsepower seems so normal now. However, you need, in order to output full power from your battery pack, a warm battery. We already mentioned the cold weather. Your 1,000 horsepower Rivian is not going to be 1,000 horsepower when it's 20 degrees outside, unless you spend an hour and a half or however realistically 45 minutes to an hour of heating to warm it up, and you've burned the energy anyway. And so it's very difficult to achieve max power when the battery is cold. So in order to achieve your maximum or minimum acceleration time, your maximum horsepower, you need to warm the battery pack up. And a lot of electric cars have drag strip modes or, these types of situations that run the heating systems. And then you get that one hard acceleration. When the battery's right at maximum charge, maximum temperature, it can output just enough to set your quarter-mile record. And then the battery overheats. Then you go, oh, so I only had a small window as to which I could achieve full power, and now I'm at my thermal limit of the battery pack. The interesting thing is, for track use, so there's one side of performance, a straight line performance, which is I don't know. To me, not that exciting. What's more exciting is consistent lapping. There are very few electric cars that can do consistent lapping for a track day. Tesla Model 3 Performance overheats very quickly. Even Taycan can overheat. Model S Plaid can overheat. Ioniq 5N really seems to be the only one that's sized properly from a cooling perspective, but still has some of the limitations that we'll talk about here, which is you actually want to start with a as cold as possible battery pack and motors. So there's pre-chilling functions for sustained track use. So if you want to go fast, you want everything warm, but if you want to go long, you need it as cold as possible so that you can have sustained performance, which means you're not getting your maximum power. And this is the harsh reality of tracking electric vehicles, which is you have to choose. And a lot of cars have two different modes. Ioniq 5N has a drag strip mode and an endurance mode. And you have to choose what temperature do you want your systems? Do you want sustained performance or fast? And in most of these cars, to be honest, even when the batteries are chilled down, they're still incredibly fast and really fun to drive. And I'm not saying you're going 2 miles an hour around the track, but it just seems that almost every electric car, even with pre-chilling, has a limited, shorter period of time that they can stay out for consistent lapping when you're driving hard. And that is because you'll just eventually heat up whatever the weakest link is first, whether it's your inverter, typically your motors, or your battery pack. The battery's pretty big thermal mass, then you're just constantly battling thermal management. So there's modes now, like track mode in Tesla Model 3 has a function, and Mustang Mach-E has a function for like their Mach-E Rally. They have a Rally Sport mode, or Unbridled Extend in the GT, and some other things where manufacturers are trying to say, we can do a 20-minute lap session. They're saying our car is suited for track use. And the only way they're actually able to make their car suited for track use is to limit the total power output. For example, in Mustang Mach-E Rally, I was just driving, you click the rally mode, and instantly the top 40% of the power is no longer available. So now I just spent all this money for a 500 plus horsepower electric SUV, and it's turned into a 300 horsepower electric SUV. And you go, what? That seems so annoying and so dumb. And it really does. And there's no way around it. And Tesla's just introduced new features to their Model 3 to say, hey, we can do consistent lapping. And they're doing the same thing. They're pulling the maximum performance down so that you can have repeatable lap times and repeatable driving performance at the expense of the total power, which is what you paid for and why you bought such a cool, fast electric car. And to me, this is such a problem. It really is. And so not only do you not have the emotion of the sound and the shifting and the nuanced nature of a combustion engine where they're inherently imperfect, which makes them perfect because you have to optimize around it. Now you're optimizing around something you can't see or feel or hear. You're optimizing around thermal management. So your eyes are constantly on the gauges. You're like, okay, I'm going to, I'm in traffic right now. I'm going to shut off regen. You're going to do whatever is possible to limit the amount of thermal stress on your driveline so that you can stay out on track for an extended period of time. And I've been lucky enough to drive electric cars on tens, or probably not 100 tracks, but tens of tracks, maybe 30 or 40 different racetracks, and including the Nürburgring and Taycan Turbo GT and some crazy cars. And it's always a problem. Thermal management is always a problem on track. Really, except for the Ioniq 5N. The problem with the Ioniq 5N, though, and really any electric car when tracking, is your range on track. We mentioned earlier, there's no one range to a vehicle. Well, there's almost no range to your vehicle on track. Your 300-mile car turns into a 60-mile range car. And again, they only make full power at high state of charge and warm. So you have to start with a cold battery, high state of charge, and then the more you drive on track, it's going to deplete the battery very quickly, which adds to degradation. And then you are essentially rising the temperature. So it's always a question as to, are you going to hit your low state of charge power limit or your temperature limit first? And these things happen quicker than most people realize. It does depend on the car, but if you're really ripping on it, you will overheat the car. So then you're developing this new type of driving style, which I've been lucky enough I've been driving electric cars on track for, 8-10 years. So I've gotten really good at this, where you turn everything into a momentum car. You give up lap times for sustained performance, where you're no longer shoving a ton of regen into the battery pack under braking or doing all these crazy weird things to have sustained performance. Not to mention, in between your sessions, you have to charge. Most racetracks and canyon roads where you want to be driving quickly do not have charging equipment. Now, that's becoming more popular on racetracks, but I love driving in canyon roads. I travel to places like the Tail of the Dragon or Angeles Crest Highway, some of the best driving roads in the world we have in our country. And you have to charge up typically at least in the Smoky Mountains, like at a level 2 station, but in California at a DC charger. Drive as slow as possible to conserve as much energy as you can on the way to the canyon road. Rip your canyon once and then drive really slow back, and sometimes charge if you're in the middle of the mountains, which is where the good driving roads are. Charge your car overnight. And there's nothing more frustrating to me as a car enthusiast who does love electric cars than waiting on my car to charge when I could be out on a canyon road ripping hard. The one last point I'll make on the performance side is the weight of electric cars, although I don't necessarily totally buy that argument, because Tesla's done an incredible job with Model 3 Performance, which is probably the most popular tracked electric car. Like I go to the track and I see a bunch of Model 3s out for track days. The occasional Polestar 2 Performance. Ioniq 5N is going to be popular. That's quite heavy, and it feels heavy when you drive it really fast. But in general, like a Model 3 versus the BMW M3, there's not that much weight difference there. And I can't remember if the Model 3 was lighter than the M3, but it was way closer than you would think. So weight, certainly some, but in general, I actually think combustion cars are getting really heavy and removed and isolated as well. So that's just something happening for sure. So that's the performance side, which is where you want to drive fast. There's no infrastructure to support it. The thermal management systems are not really conducive with thermal longevity. So you have to have the battery warm in order to drive, get the maximum performance, but then you can't stay there for too long. And this is exciting to me as a car reviewer, all of these challenges, because I get to watch the automakers work on improving and in getting better and getting better. And this is where Hyundai deserves all the credit for their Ioniq 5N's thermal management systems. Okay, the next and final topic of electric cars. What's bad about them? It is towing with your electric car, or truck in this case, or SUV. And the biggest thing with the biggest misconception when it comes to towing with an electric vehicle is actually the weight doesn't matter so much. I see so many comments. How far does it go with 10,000 pounds on the back? Well, actually, once you're up to speed and everything's moving, unless you're in the mountains, weight has a far less effect on the total vehicle range than the aero profile of the trailer. And also, the bearing loss and the drag and some other stuff. But the weight doesn't actually impact the range as much as you would think. And I've done videos on this in the past, of course. But it really comes down to an aero-optimized trailer. But no question, whenever you slap a roof box on the car or a bicycle's on the back or a trailer on the back and you start messing up the aerodynamic profile that was so carefully sculpted to eke out every last mile of range for your electric car, they will go significantly less far. The nice thing is, though, if you're towing locally, or even if you have a sense of adventure and you do want to try towing with your EV, they tow really well. I've been lucky enough to tow with every electric truck on the market and most every electric SUV, and it's effortless. You have all the torque in the world, and you just pull everything where you want it to go. The thing is, though, we get into the range. So not only is your range significantly decreased, it means you need to charge up way more than you would without the trailer. So now your 10 or 15 minute charging stops without the trailer, where you would hop charger to charger, you still have to stop at every charger now, but you actually have to charge all the way up to 80, 90, 100% state of charge, which in most every electric truck on the market, it might take, let's just say realistically, 40 minutes from 5 to 80%. Let's just say 40, 45 minutes for most of them, which is far too slow, in my opinion, for fast charging. Again, most charging happens at home overnight. It's very convenient. Doesn't feel like it takes any time at all. But when you're charging up to 80%, okay, 45 minutes, maybe not the end of the world. But when you're having to do that twice as frequently, and it might take another 45 minutes to go from 80 to 100% in some of these vehicles, now it just becomes unsustainable. Totally not possible. And that is where other technologies such as plug-in hybrid or extended range EVs need to come in, because the infrastructure is not set up to handle the trailer. So a lot of times you have to drop the trailer in the parking lot, mess around with that, go charge it. Your range is decreased and you need to charge deeper, which takes longer. I've done so much towing with electric trucks and I'm totally over it. I really hate it. And I'm someone who in general loves the challenge. It's just the time. It just takes so much time if you're going on a long trip. Now, if I was towing around town or taking a boat to the lake or going on a family trip with an RV and you've got time, then it's fun. Then I actually really do enjoy it. And I love the way electric trucks tow. But without question, it just is like the worst use case for an electric vehicle. And it's primarily because most of the trucks have too small of a battery. And so the best electric truck for towing is when we get into the General Motors stuff. So Escalade IQ, Silverado EV, Sierra EV, with those 200 plus kilowatt hour packs, you actually do get some usable range and very fast charging out of it. Okay, so that's the primary 10 categories of why electric cars or bad things about electric cars. The true problems with EVs. So we had charging, mostly from the vehicle side. So that's charging curves, temperature, all of that stuff. There's a whole episode to do on infrastructure. There's highway range loss. And of course, there's never just one range with electric cars. The BMS Sway. Don't trust the BMS. We have the shirt on our website, shop.outofspecstudios.com. Winter performance and range in cold temperatures. Phantom drain, where energy is evaporated. And again, it's not for every electric car, but Tesla, Lucid, Rivian, they do experience some phantom drain and they are improving. Degradation, where you just know in the back of your head, no matter what you're doing, and you can do things to increase your degradation, full charging, which is also crazy because it's like some cars only make power above 80% state of charge. And you never want to go above 80% state of charge because you don't want to degrade your battery. So many little problems with those things there. I think the degradation's the big one. The service and repair side of things is rough. The depreciation, of course, is rough. There's almost no new electric vehicle on the market today that won't depreciate heavily or as heavily as a combustion car or more heavily. They'll all match or exceed the combustion equivalent, I think, except for maybe the electric G-Wagon. I don't know. I feel like those, if they can keep, those might have a pretty good resale value. The performance driving is wonderful when you have everything perfect, but it's so hard to drive an electric car in a performance manner and sustainably in canyon roads and track use. And towing. There's just some other little things on top of those items that I just put in an other category that I thought I would share with you. The first is the electric vehicle community is truly fantastic. I mean, you meet some cool people at chargers. You can talk to them online and there's this great knowledge base, but there's also on the flip side, a lot of electric vehicle enthusiasts or electric vehicle interested people are investors. And if you say anything bad about their company, anything bad that could hurt their position in a company, they come at you with pitchforks, and you just feel, at least I do, and I'm certainly way more exposed to it than the average consumer because my job is to post things online, but you just feel always this sense of pressure from investors in the EV community. The next is the fire risk of owning an electric car. It's incredibly rare to see or hear about an EV fire. Maybe it's not so rare to hear about them in the media because everyone likes to pick up on an EV fire. But there are some hard truths when it comes to EV fire, and I would like to do more videos on this, which is if there is a runaway thermal event in an electric vehicle's battery pack, they are harder to put out than a combustion vehicle. There's new technology such as blankets that can go over everything. You can soak them in like a shipping container filled with water, essentially, is what I've seen the Netherlands have some situations with, and it just becomes a little bit of a really hard situation to put out a fire. And again, it's super important to stress that fires are incredibly rare with EVs. The next is a lot coming down to material recycling and sourcing. Without question, there are certain components in electric vehicles that don't come from kind or friendly places to either their people or from a political perspective. We have a lot of resources coming from countries that we have, and we as in America, but whatever. And it's a very politicized material sourcing argument with electric cars, which is why you're seeing certain incentives only apply to vehicles end of line assembly point, and also where their materials and chemicals are sourced from. So that's a real, consideration. And I would argue, sometimes we see people online, like we could do a whole episode on like, here's all the FUD about electric cars out there, and here's how we should respond to them. I feel like that could be interesting, because a lot of the complaints about EVs online are rooted in some truth, like we mentioned, but usually not as bad as people say it is. And honestly, I think the pros severely outweigh the cons when it comes to electric. But the material sourcing is an interesting one, and one that I'm not sure we have the full picture on. Also, very important to buy an electric car with good software. Driving electric is a completely different experience than driving combustion, and so many electric vehicle manufacturers mess up the entire experience by giving their owners absolute crap software to not help maximize their EV. And the ones that are doing the best software are Tesla and Rivian, and everyone else needs to catch up. Some Chinese companies are doing good software as well, I should mention. But primarily, most any electric car that you buy on the road has just subpar software, except for Tesla and Rivian. I think that's kind of it. We have a whole episode to do on the problems with charging. I don't want to just point out problems. I want to point out solutions. So this will be an ongoing series of me sitting here talking to you about problems and solutions to electric vehicles. I hope you enjoyed this episode, me rambling on about the things that I really think are problems with electric cars. I'm really curious to see your comments. Of course, this video is going to piss some people off because they want me to put all the pros in here, but it's already going to be over an hour long. I'll do another video on all the pros of driving an EV and the interesting things. And I really hope this helps shed some actual light on what it's like to drive electric. Thanks so much for watching. Really don't take any of the stuff in this video the wrong way, but these are all problems that I know can and will be solved with EVs into the future. But today, some of this is pretty tough. See you on another one again soon. Bye-bye.